The mansion did not breathe warmth. It exhaled marble, glass, and silence, the kind of silence that came from money so vast it could drown out laughter. 12 nannies had walked through its gates in the past 30 days. 12 women, all polished and smiling, ready to prove their training could tame chaos. 12 were left in tears, their suitcases trailing behind them like surrender flags. Alexander Rothwell, the millionaire master of the house, found it amusing. Over dinner, between calls with investors, he would remark casually, "How many days this time? 3? 5? Place your bets." His guests laughed. His children, 3 boys, identical at first glance, but each with a streak of mischief, laughed too, though for a different reason. Henry, Ethan, and Lucas were 7 years old, clever enough to know how to weaponize boredom, wealthy enough to believe rules didn't apply to them, and lonely enough to disguise pain behind rebellion. They did not have their mother to soften their edges. Victoria Rothwell, a brilliant lawyer for the glittering world of celebrities, lived inside airports and courtrooms more than inside her own home. Even when she was physically present, her mind lived in depositions, client scandals, and strategy calls. She had mastered the art of smiling at her sons while her phone buzzed endlessly in her palm. And Alexander, their father, was no better. His calendar was a fortress. He gave the boys 5 minutes at breakfast, perhaps 10 at night, if they were lucky. When asked why, he would shrug, "They'll thank me when they inherit." So the children learned early that they could burn through nannies like matches and nobody in that house would stop them. When Isabella arrived, nobody expected her to last a day. She did not wear the polished black of the previous nannies, nor the stiff collar that looked like it belonged in a museum. She carried no illusion of grandeur, no glossy resume padded with recommendations. Just one bag, a simple dress, and eyes that did not dart nervously the way others had. Mrs. Aldridge, the housekeeper, shook her head. "Poor thing. The boys will shred her spirit by tomorrow. 13th in 30 days. Alexander's first glance at her was not kind. He leaned on the grand staircase, tie loosened after a late meeting, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Another applicant to the Rothwell experiment," he said. "Miss Isabella. Isabella." He rolled the name as though tasting something bland. "Well, Isabella, the odds are against you. My sons made professionals quit in record time. So tell me, what makes you think you'll be different?" She didn't flinch. "I didn't come here to prove I'm different," she said softly. "I came because children don't need perfection. They need someone who doesn't leave." Alexander smirked, but the smirk did not reach his eyes. The triplets were already preparing their battlefield. They tied ropes across corridors, filled water balloons, scattered marbles, and waited behind doors for the first screams. Every other nanny had cried out, by now slipping, shouting, threatening, begging. But Isabella stepped on the marbles, steadied herself, and laughed. Not the nervous laugh of fear. A warm laugh that filled the corridor like sunlight spilling through stained glass. She bent down, gathered a handful of marbles, and said, "If you want me to fall, you'll have to try harder." Or, she knelt so the boys could hear her whisper, "You can teach me the game and we'll see who wins." The triplets froze. They hadn't expected a challenge. And before we go further, if stories like this stir something in you, if you believe hidden truths and fragile families deserve to be told, subscribe now. More stories are coming, each more tangled than the last. And I want to hear from you. What do you think Isabella should uncover next in this mansion? A hidden letter? A forbidden love? A secret child no one knows about? Leave your idea below. Your comment might inspire the very next chapter we bring to life. For the first time in months, the triplets laughed not out of cruelty, but out of surprise. Isabella had not yelled. She had not quit. She had played along. But upstairs, in a locked drawer of Alexander's office, there was a document the family never spoke of. And while Isabella had no idea yet, the letter that would change everything was already waiting. The first night in the mansion was always the hardest for new staff. The corridors felt endless, the chandeliers seemed to watch from above, and the walls carried the faint echoes of arguments long past. Most nannies had spent their first evening crying silently in their rooms, questioning their decision to enter the Rothwell household. Isabella, however, sat at the edge of the narrow bed the staff had assigned her, listening. She could hear the boys running upstairs, not footsteps of children settling into bedtime, but stomps of a miniature army staging rebellion. She heard a crash of glass, followed by laughter. No adult voice reprimanded them. No parental figure stepped in. She thought of her own childhood, of nights where silence wasn't luxury but punishment. She remembered the sound of slammed doors, the way loneliness seeped into her bones until she swore to herself, "One day, if I ever stand before children who feel forgotten, I will not abandon them." That promise, forged in pain, pulsed now like a drumbeat in her chest. The next morning began with chaos. Henry smeared toothpaste along the banister. Ethan dumped cereal across the dining table. Lucas tied one of the mansion's expensive ties around the dog's neck and declared him Sir Barkington, ruler of breakfast. Isabella walked in carrying a tray of toast. Most nannies would have screamed, begged, or threatened. Instead, Isabella placed the tray gently on the ruined table and said, "If Sir Barkington is ruler, then surely he deserves a throne." The boys blinked. She took the laundry basket from the corner, flipped it upside down, placed a velvet cushion on top, and bowed. "Your Majesty, the kingdom awaits." For the first time, the triplets laughed without cruelty. They clapped delighted. The housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, nearly dropped her teapot. She had never seen anyone win their affections so quickly. Alexander arrived late to breakfast, of course. He strode in wearing a dark suit, eyes already glued to his phone. "What's this circus?" he muttered when he saw the dog perched on a makeshift throne, and his sons giggling. Isabella rose, steady and calm. "Circus? No, sir. It's diplomacy. Even kings must eat breakfast." The boys erupted in laughter again. Alexander's brow furrowed. He didn't like being upstaged. "Careful, Isabella," he said coldly. "They'll break you soon enough." But his sons were looking at her with a kind of admiration he had never earned. Days turned into a week. The triplets unleashed new tricks daily, hiding frogs in her shoes, pouring flour down the laundry chute, setting off toy alarms at midnight. Yet Isabella never yelled. She transformed every prank into a lesson, every insult into a challenge, every rebellion into laughter. "Why don't you quit like the others?" Henry asked her one afternoon, his voice sharper than his age should allow. "Because you don't want me to," Isabella answered. Henry frowned. "We want you gone." "No, you want someone to prove you're worth staying for." The boy's mouth opened, then shut. He had no comeback. Victoria Rothwell returned briefly that weekend. The triplets ran to the door, hoping for once she had come home to stay. But their mother walked past them, phone in hand, already arguing with a client about a leaked scandal. Isabella sighed in the nursery. "She never stays," Lucas whispered. "She stays for her clients," Ethan added bitterly. Isabella didn't scold them for speaking against their mother. She simply pulled a blanket around their shoulders and said, "Then I will stay until you sleep." For the first time, they let someone tuck them in. But shadows lingered in the mansion. One evening, after the boys had finally drifted into dreams, Isabella returned to her room to find an envelope under her door. Thick parchment, sealed with the Rothwell crest. No handwriting on the outside. She hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside, a single line, written in sharp ink. "Don't trust the master. The children are not safe." Her pulse quickened. Who had left it? A servant? A relative? One of the nannies who had fled? She reread the words, her mind racing. The warning wasn't about the triplets being mischievous. It was about something deeper, something dangerous. The next day, she noticed things she hadn't before. The way Alexander locked his office drawers with an intensity that bordered on paranoia. The hushed conversations between him and the family lawyer in the library. The way he shut down any mention of his own father, the boy's late grandfather. At lunch, she overheard Mrs. Aldridge whispering with the chauffeur. "If she ever finds out about the will," the woman hissed. The chauffeur silenced her with a look. But Isabella had already heard. The will. Suddenly, the letter's warning felt heavier. What truth was hidden in that office? And why would it put the children in danger? That night, the triplets asked her to tell them a story. Instead of a fairy tale, she told them something else, not the full truth, but a parable wrapped in her calm voice. Once there was a kingdom, she began, with 3 princes who were wild and clever. Their castle was strong, but it had cracks. And one day, a stranger came, not a knight or a queen, just someone who promised never to leave. The princes tested her, but she stayed. And do you know what happened? What? The boys whispered, eyes wide. The castle began to change. Not because the walls grew stronger, but because someone finally listened to the princes. They smiled, their eyelids heavy. And Isabella, as she watched them drift into sleep, knew her promise had grown roots in this house. But promises, she also knew, were often tested by secrets. By the second week, the novelty of Isabella's resilience had begun to bother Alexander more than it impressed him. He had grown accustomed to the pattern, new nanny, temporary calm, inevitable collapse. But Isabella defied the script. The triplets were still wild, but their laughter was no longer edged with cruelty. The mansion's halls, once filled with shrieks of rebellion, now echoed with the sound of children playing. One morning, as sunlight poured through the tall windows, Isabella placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of the boys. Henry was humming. Ethan tapped his fork in rhythm. Lucas whispered something that made his brothers burst into giggles. Alexander looked up from his newspaper, irritated. "Why are they so loud?" "They're not loud," Isabella replied calmly. "They're happy." His eyes flicked up sharp. "And you're paid to keep order, not to measure happiness." "Order without joy is just silence, sir," she said. The triplets froze, expecting him to explode. But Alexander only folded his newspaper tighter. His jaw worked, but no words came. Victoria returned again that weekend, or at least her body did. She swept into the house in a tailored suit, heels clicking, phone pressed to her ear. The boys ran to her, but she lifted a finger for silence while she argued with a client about, said softly, "You missed our football game," Ethan added. Victoria's smile wavered. "Mommy has to work, boys. You understand." They nodded, but their eyes said otherwise. Isabella stood silently in the corner, watching. She wanted to tell Victoria what the boys really needed wasn't gifts or rushed kisses. But she held her tongue. It wasn't her place, not yet. Later, she found the triplets sulking in the nursery. She knelt beside them. "You're allowed to be sad," she whispered. "You're allowed to miss her." Henry kicked at the carpet. "She chooses work over us." "No," Isabella said gently. "She chooses work instead of you. That's different. But one day, she might realize the difference matters." The boys clung to her like she was the anchor in a storm. The letter under her door haunted Isabella. She kept it hidden under her mattress, but its words rang in her mind. "Don't trust the master. The children are not safe." One evening, while dusting the library shelves, she overheard voices. Alexander's deep growl. The family lawyer's smooth reply. "She doesn't need to know," Alexander snapped. "The clause is explicit," the lawyer countered. "If the children are deemed neglected or unsafe, the inheritance transfers." "Enough." Alexander slammed a fist against the desk. "No one will question my guardianship. Do you hear me?" Isabella nearly dropped the feather duster. Neglected? Unsafe? Were those words about the boys? An inheritance? Her pulse raced. The pieces didn't fit yet, but a puzzle had begun to form. It was on the third Sunday that Alexander finally tested her patience in public. Guests had come for brunch, business partners, polished wives, children in designer shoes. The triplets were expected to parade like trophies, polished and quiet. But Isabella had been playing football with them on the lawn. Their hair was messy, their cheeks flushed with joy, their shoes streaked with grass. When Alexander saw them, his face darkened. "Look at them," he barked, loud enough for guests to hear. "Like street children. This is what I pay you for." The guests chuckled awkwardly. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not shrink. She stepped forward, brushing grass from Lucas's hair. "You pay me to care for them, sir. And today they are not ornaments for display. They are boys who laughed, ran, and felt alive." The lawn went silent. Alexander's jaw clenched. His eyes drilled into her. He expected her to apologize, maybe even to beg for forgiveness. Instead, she stood tall, her hand resting lightly on Henry's shoulder. The triplets pressed closer to her, as though sensing that in this moment she was their shield. Finally, Alexander turned on his heel and walked away. But the humiliation lingered in the air. That night, Isabella found another note slipped under her door. This one read, "If you protect them, be ready to face what comes next." One evening, Isabella took the boys into the garden after dusk. Fireflies floated above the hedges like sparks of gold. "They're magic," Ethan whispered. "They're just bugs," Henry scoffed. "Not just bugs," Isabella said softly. "Fireflies carry light even in darkness. That's why they're special. Do you know who else can do that?" The triplets leaned in. "You," she whispered. "Even when this house feels cold, you can carry light. Together." The boys stared at her, then at each other. Slowly they clasped hands. It was a small gesture, but Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "For the first time, dangerous weapon in this house," he warned. "Then perhaps it's time someone carried it." His eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever, but you don't understand what's at stake. Those boys are my legacy. No stranger will dictate how they are raised." "I'm not here to dictate," Isabella said. "I'm here because they deserve more than a father who only sees them as legacy." Silence. The words hung in the air, heavier than any insult. For the first time, Alexander looked unsettled. From that day on, he watched her differently. Not just as an employee, but as a threat. She was earning the boys' loyalty, and he could not afford that, not if the whispers about inheritance were true. He began testing her, setting traps. Tasks impossible to complete, instructions designed to trip her up. But Isabella met each challenge with calm determination. One afternoon, he told her to prepare the boys for a gala dinner: tuxedos, polished shoes, hair slicked back. The triplets protested, of course, but Isabella knelt beside them. "Tonight you will dress as gentlemen," she said, "but not because your father demands it. Because you choose to show the world you are more than chaos." Somehow the boys listened. They entered the gala hall polished and proud, and every guest noticed. Alexander seethed quietly, realizing she had succeeded where he had failed. Curiosity gnawed at Isabella. The letters, the overheard conversations, the will what was hidden in Alexander's office. One night, after the mansion had fallen silent, she passed by his study. The drawer was locked as always, but the key glinted on the desk. Her heart pounded. She shouldn't. It wasn't her place. Yet she thought of the warning: the children are not safe. Her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock. The drawer clicked open. Inside, she found documents, financial statements, property deeds, and one thick envelope sealed with the Rothwell crest. The label read, "Last Will and Testament of Richard Rothwell." She froze. Richard, Alexander's father, the boy's grandfather. Before she could open it, a voice cut through the darkness. "What do you think you're doing?" Alexander stood in the doorway, eyes like steel. The silence between them crackled with danger. The will lay half-exposed in the drawer, her hand hovering above it. Isabella swallowed hard. "I was cleaning." "Don't lie to me." His voice was low, lethal. The triplets stirred upstairs, unaware that the battle for their future had just begun. And Isabella, heart-pounding, realized the impossible problem was no longer hidden. It was here, staring her in the face, and she had already stepped too far to turn back. The moment Alexander caught Isabella at the drawer, the mansion's air changed. "You think I don't know your type?" he hissed, stepping closer. His shadow stretched across the desk. "Climbers. Parasites. You come here pretending to care for my sons, but what you want is power. Money. Access to what is mine." Isabella's breath trembled, but she held her ground. "I want none of that. I only want what is best for your children." "My children are none of your concern beyond your paycheck," he snapped. "They are my concern because they are human," Isabella said, her voice steady. His jaw twitched. Few dared speak to him that way. "You're lucky," he finally growled, "that I don't dismiss you right now. But mark my words, the moment you overstep again, you're gone." He slammed the drawer shut and pocketed the key. By morning, the staff already knew. Servants whispered in the halls. The nanny was caught snooping. "She won't last the week." Mrs. Aldridge, though sympathetic, warned her. "The master doesn't forgive easily. If you truly care for the boys, tread carefully. He'll make your life miserable now." And he did. Slip was a chance to humiliate her. At dinners, he mocked her accent. In front of guests, he ridiculed her clothing. "My son's nanny believes plain fabric is fashionable," he'd sneer. The boys glared at him, but Isabella only smiled faintly and continued her duties. She had learned long ago, humiliation only holds power if you let it pierce your spirit. The triplets felt the shift. Their father's cruelty toward Isabella sparked something new in them, not rebellion against her, but rebellion with her. One afternoon, Henry whispered, "We'll prank him instead." "No," Isabella said quickly. "But he's mean to you," Ethan argued. "And we don't like it," Lucas added. She crouched beside them. "Listen to me. Fighting cruelty with cruelty makes you the same. Do you want to be like him?" They looked at each other, quiet. "Then how do we fight?" Henry asked. "By standing tall. By proving joy is stronger than his anger. By showing him that kindness wins." They didn't fully understand, but they nodded. That night, instead of pranks, they surprised her by tidying their playroom without being asked. It wasn't perfect, blocks still scattered, crayons out of order, but the effort made her throat tighten. "You're learning faster than you think," she whispered, pulling them close. Victoria returned again, late at night, perfume trailing, exhaustion etched on her face. She kissed the boys absent-mindedly and murmured, "I'll make up to you this weekend." But Isabella noticed. She said the same thing every time. When she left, Ethan muttered, "She never makes it up." Isabella sat with them until they fell asleep, thinking of her own absent mother, who had vanished when she was only 9. The pain of waiting for someone who never comes back was something she knew too well. Her own scars whispered inside her, "This is why you stay. Because you know what abandonment feels like." 2 weeks later came the annual Rothwell Charity Gala, a grand event where the family flaunted wealth under the guise of philanthropy. The triplets were dressed in tuxedos. Isabella adjusted their bow ties with gentle hands. "You look like princes," she said. At the gala hall, chandeliers blazed, guests mingled, champagne flowed. Alexander paraded his sons like prized horses. But when Isabella entered behind them, whispers started. "That's the nanny," someone said with a smirk. "The one he hasn't fired yet." Alexander overheard. Instead of defending her, he smirked. "She's stubborn, I'll give her that. Though hardly presentable." The guests laughed. Isabella's cheeks burned, but she didn't lower her head. Later, while serving drinks, she accidentally brushed a tray against a guest's sleeve. The man exaggerated his shock, and laughter rippled again. Alexander raised his glass. You see? She doesn't belong in circles like this. For a moment, humiliation threatened to crush her. But then she caught sight of the triplets watching from the corner. Their faces were pale, their fists clenched. She straightened her shoulders, looked the guest in the eye, and said, I belong wherever children need someone who won't leave. Gasps followed. Some scoffed, others looked impressed. Alexander's face turned stone, but the boys smiled with pride. After the gala, Alexander cornered her in the hall. Defiance in front of my guests, he snarled. You forget your place. My place, Isabella said softly, is by your sons. You're making them weak, he spat. No, she replied. I'm making them human. His eyes blazed. You think you know everything? You don't even know what's written in that will. If you did, you'd run. He turned sharply, and to be kids. Tears burned Isabella's eyes. She pulled him close. Then here, with me, you can be children. Laugh, cry, make mistakes. You are not legacies. You are lives. The boys buried their faces against her, finally letting themselves cry. It was in that moment Isabella understood. The war wasn't just for survival in the mansion. It was for their very childhood. Lying awake after the boys had fallen asleep, Isabella thought of her past. She had once worked 3 jobs to support her younger sister after their father abandoned them. She had scrubbed floors, waited tables, studied by candlelight. She knew what it meant to be invisible, underestimated, mocked. It was that history that gave her strength now. Every humiliation in the mansion felt familiar, but she had survived worse. And she had promised her sister on her deathbed, I will never walk away from those who need me. That promise was what kept her standing, even as Alexander tried to break her spirit. One evening, Mrs. Aldridge slipped into Isabella's room with a worried look. You need to be careful, the housekeeper whispered. There are things in this house, things better left untouched. You mean the will, Isabella said. The older woman stiffened. You know. I know enough. Mrs. Aldridge hesitated, then leaned closer. All I can say is this. The will was written to protect the children. But Alexander, he doesn't want it read. If it's enforced, everything changes. Changes how? But the housekeeper only shook her head. Be careful, child. For their sake. The next days became harder. Alexander doubled her duties, looking for cracks. Guests mocked her more openly. Even Victoria, in her rare appearance, dismissed her. At dinner, Victoria eyed her coldly. Alexander, are you sure it's wise to keep a nanny who courts attention? The boys should not become attached. They already are, Alexander muttered darkly. Victoria sipped her wine. Then perhaps she should be replaced before they forget who their real mother is. The triplets shifted uncomfortably. Isabella lowered her gaze, hiding the pain in her chest. But inside, a vow crystallized. They will never forget who truly stood by them. It was at a formal dinner with investors that Alexander staged his cruelest test yet. Dozens of suited men and jeweled women sat around the long mahogany table. Isabella was ordered to serve silently, while the triplets were forced into starched suits, told to sit perfectly still. The boys squirmed. They hated these evenings, the false laughter, the endless toasts, the way their father paraded them like trophies. Isabella could see their small bodies tense with rebellion. When Henry reached for a bread roll before the first course was served, Alexander's voice cracked like a whip. Hands off, boy. Do you want to embarrass me again? The guests chuckled. Henry froze, shame flooding his face. Isabella's chest tightened. She wanted to comfort him, but her place was in the shadows. Still, when Ethan dropped his fork out of nervousness and the laughter grew louder, she stepped forward. They're children, not soldiers, she said quietly. The table fell silent. Alexander's eyes flared with fury. You dare speak at my table? Her hands trembled, but she did not back down. I dare because no one else will. They need a father, not a general. Gasps rose from the guests. One man coughed awkwardly. Victoria pressed her lips together, pretending not to notice. Alexander's jaw worked like stone. "Out," he hissed. Isabella lowered her eyes and left the room. Behind her, she could hear the boys' chairs scrape as though they wanted to follow, but Alexander's sharp command held them down. That night, Alexander struck his hardest blow. He summoned all the staff, lined them in the grand hall, and announced, "This nanny has overstayed her welcome. She snoops, defies, and poisons my children against me. She will be dismissed tomorrow." Gasps rippled. The triplets cried out, "No, we want her to stay." But Alexander silenced them with a glare. Isabella stood, her chest heavy. The humiliation was complete. Every servant's eyes on her, every whisper echoing. She wanted to collapse. She wanted to scream. But then she remembered the fireflies. Carry light, even in darkness. So she lifted her chin and said, "If I leave tomorrow, it won't be because I quit. It will be because you're afraid of what the truth might reveal." A silence deeper than shame filled the hall. Alexander's lips curled. "We'll see how long your bravery lasts." That night, Isabella packed her small bag, unsure if she would still be there by morning. The boys wept quietly, clinging to her sleeves. Outside, thunder rumbled again as if the skies themselves knew the storm inside the mansion had only begun. And in the locked drawer upstairs, the will waited, its words powerful enough to shatter everything. Isabella lay awake, whispering to herself, "I will not give up. Not now, not ever." But she knew when the sun rose, everything would change. The sun rose heavy with dread. Isabella folded her single dress into her suitcase. She half expected Alexander to storm in with guards, to throw her out onto the street before the boys were even awake. But instead, it was the triplets who burst through her door first, their faces streaked with tears. "You can't leave," Henry cried. "We'll run away if you go." Ethan declared. Lucas grabbed her arm. "We'll never forgive him." She pulled them close, her heart breaking. "Listen to me. Sometimes life pushes us away from where we want to be. But no one can push away love. Wherever I go, that love stays with you." They clung harder. "No," Henry said fiercely. "You promised. You said you don't leave." Her chest tightened. She had promised. And as the heavy footsteps of Alexander echoed down the corridor, Isabella knew she would not surrender yet. Alexander entered the room, eyes blazing. But behind him stood Victoria, arms crossed, phone finally pocketed. "She's right," Victoria said coldly. "You can't dismiss her yet." Alexander spun. "Excuse me." Think, Alexander. 12 nannies gone already. The press catches wind of a 13th? They'll smell blood. Do you want headlines about your unmanageable heirs? He hesitated. Reputation mattered to him more than anything. Victoria continued, "Keep her. For now. At least until the gala season ends. Appearances must be maintained." Alexander growled, but finally relented. "Very well. She stays for now." He jabbed a finger at Isabella. "But one misstep and you're gone." Isabella said nothing. She only held the boys tighter, silently thanking fate for the unexpected reprieve. That afternoon, Ethan tugged Isabella's sleeve. "We want to show you something." The boys led her into the garden, to the old oak tree where they often played. Henry knelt by the roots and dug with small hands until he unearthed a tin box. Inside was another torn fragment of paper, older, yellowed, edges worn by soil. Lucas whispered, "We think it's Grandpa's." Isabella unfolded it carefully. Her eyes widened as she read. "The children must never be left without affection. Should guardianship fall into Alexander's hands, oversight is required. A secondary custodian shall be appointed if neglect to him panic rising." "Call a doctor," she cried. But Alexander, irritated, muttered, It's a cold. Children survive worse. No. Isabella snapped, trembling. He needs care now, starred. When he refused, Isabella wrapped Lucas in blankets herself and stormed into the rain. Henry and Ethan ran behind, shouting. Mrs. Aldridge grabbed a phone and called an ambulance. Within minutes, flashing lights cut through the storm. At the hospital, doctors confirmed it was pneumonia, dangerous if untreated. Isabella's eyes filled with tears as Lucas was rushed into care. And when Alexander arrived, late and fuming, the doctor glared at him. If this woman hadn't acted, your son could have died. Gasps echoed through the waiting room. Alexander's arrogance cracked. As the doctors prepared medication, the staff struggled with Lucas's panic. He cried, thrashed, begged for Isabella. One nurse whispered he won't calm down. Isabella stepped forward, her voice lowered, melodic, carrying a lullaby from her childhood. The room hushed as Lucas's sobs softened. His breathing steadied. The nurse blinked. You're trained. Isabella shook her head. No, just practiced. My sister was sick once. Music was the only thing that soothed her. The doctors nodded approvingly. And for the first time, Alexander looked at her not as an intruder, but as someone holding a skill beyond his comprehension, the power to reach his sons where he never could. News of the hospital incident leaked. A nurse, sympathetic to Isabella, whispered the story to a journalist. Soon headlines swirled. Millionaire neglects sick son, nanny saves him. Alexander raged, threatening lawsuits. But the damage was done. Questions about his parenting spread. And with those questions, whispers of the will resurfaced. Victoria hissed at him one night, if this gets worse, the board will question your fitness. Do you want your empire crumbling because of a nanny? Alexander clenched his fists. Then the will must never see daylight. But Isabella, listening from the corridor, knew daylight was already on its way. The triplets, once mischievous, grew bold in their loyalty. At breakfast, when Alexander barked orders, Henry said firmly, don't yell at her. When Victoria snapped, you're confusing them with affection, Ethan shot back, no. You confuse us with absence. And Lucas, pale but recovering, whispered in front of both parents, if Isabella leaves, we leave too. The room froze. Victoria paled. Alexander's jaw clenched. The children had spoken. That night, Isabella returned to her room to find yet another envelope waiting. But this one was not anonymous. It bore the stamp of a lawyer's office. Inside was a summons. She was requested to testify in court regarding the welfare of the Rothwell children. Her hand shook. The will was about to surface. And in the shadows of the mansion, Alexander realized his war with the 13th nanny was no longer private. It was about to go public. The letter weighed heavy in Isabella's hands. Testify? In court? Against the master of the house, who held her employment and her survival in his grip? But when she looked at the triplets sleeping soundly, their breaths uneven from weeks of fear, she knew the answer. She would go. The next morning, Alexander confronted her. He waved the letter like a blade. You think you can stand in court against me? Against me? I don't stand against you, Isabella replied quietly. I stand for them. His face darkened. Stiff in a tailored suit, flanked by lawyers. Victoria, composed as ever, scrolled through her phone even here, though her eyes flicked nervously toward the press. And then there was Isabella. Plain dress. Steady hands. Heart racing but spine straight. The judge began, we are here to review allegations of neglect in the guardianship of the Rothwell children, pursuant to the late Richard Rothwell's testament. Gasps rippled. The will had been spoken aloud. Alexander's lawyer argued first. Mr. Rothwell is a devoted father. His sons lack for nothing. These allegations come from a nanny with no pedigree, no credibility. But then the judge raised a hand. We have hospital records. Accounts of 12 nannies dismissed in a month. Reports of absence by both parents. We will hear from the nanny. She stood, her palms sweating. The entire room leaned forward. I was not born into wealth, she began softly. I have scrubbed floors, I have begged for work. But none of that matters. What matters is what I saw in this house. 3 boys, brilliant, mischievous, desperate for attention. And 12 nannies before me who left in tears because no one listened to them. I stayed. Not because it was easy, but because they needed someone to prove they were worth staying for. Her voice wavered, but then grew stronger. Children are not legacies. They are not trophies. They are lives. And lives need love, not just money. The courtroom fell silent. Even reporters stopped writing. The judge nodded slowly. And the will itself names a secondary custodian if neglect is proven. That custodian is the children's maternal grandmother. Gasps erupted. Victoria dropped her phone, color draining from her face. Alexander leapt to his feet. This is outrageous. My father hated sentimentality. He would never entrust my sons to a frail old woman. But the judge cut him off. The document is clear. If neglect is proven, oversight and shared custody transfer to the grandmother with authority to intervene. Victoria's voice cracked. Mother? She can't even climb the stairs in her own house. This is absurd. The judge remained unmoved. Absurd or not, it is the law. And the testimony we have heard today paints a troubling picture. The boys, seated near the back, clung to Isabella's hands. Henry whispered, "Don't let them take us." Her heart broke. "No one will take you anywhere you don't belong," she whispered back. But she knew the battle was far from over. The judge ordered a recess. In the corridor, Alexander cornered her once more. "You think you've won. You think a piece of paper changes anything." His voice was venom. "I built this empire. I can bury you." Isabella met his fury with calm. "You can bury me, but you can't bury the truth. It's already out." For the first time, Alexander's rage faltered. He looked at her not as an insect, but as a force he couldn't quite crush. Behind them, the triplets stood in a line, glaring at their father. And for once, he looked away first. By evening, headlines flooded every channel. Nanny testifies against Millionaire. Triplets saved by caretaker, court reviews custody. Inheritance will expose the secrets of Rothwell family. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates. Every move was photographed, every whisper amplified. Victoria retreated further into work, refusing interviews. Alexander raged, but his influence could not. Isabella saw the cracks. Not just in his fortune, in his spirit. He wasn't invincible. He was a man terrified of losing control. And she realized the truth. The will wasn't the only weapon. His own arrogance was destroying him faster than any document could. On the morning of the next hearing, Isabella stood by the window, the triplets' hands in hers. Reporters clamored outside, shouting questions. Victoria was gone again. Another case, another scandal. Alexander paced the hall, his tie loose, his face pale. The judge's words from the last session echoed, "Neglect proven means intervention." Isabella whispered to the boys, "No matter what happens today, remember this, you are not alone. You are not abandoned." The doors of the courtroom loomed ahead. The truth was about to decide everything. The courtroom was tense. The air felt heavy, thick with whispers from journalists and the clicking of cameras. Every eye turned as the Rothwells entered, Alexander looking haggard, Victoria absent altogether, Isabella calm but pale, and the triplets clinging to her hands like soldiers entering battle. The judge's gavel struck. "We reconvene regarding the welfare of Henry, Ethan, and Lucas Rothwell." Alexander's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client provides every luxury imaginable. A mansion, education, protection. These claims of neglect are exaggerated by a nanny with no legal standing." Murmurs rippled. The lawyer gestured toward Isabella. She is no guardian, no blood relative. She is a hired hand. Nothing more. Isabella's heart pounded. She knew this was the moment she might lose everything. Then the judge turned to her. "Miss Isabella, you may speak once more." She rose slowly, every step echoing. "I have been called many things in this house," she began. "Hired hand, servant, disposable. But to 3 boys who needed love, I became something else. I became the one who stayed." Gasps murmured through the crowd. Isabella's voice grew steadier. "I am not here to take their inheritance. I am not here to tarnish the Rothwell name. I am here because I have watched them cry when their mother left again. I have seen them shrink when their father shouted. And I have promised them, as I once promised my own sister, that I will not walk away." Her eyes filled with tears. Because children are not accessories. They are not burdens. They are the future. And the only legacy worth leaving is love. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. Then something unexpected happened. Henry stood. His small voice trembled, but carried through the hall. "I don't want another nanny. I want her." Ethan joined him. "She's the only one who makes us laugh." Lucas, pale but resolute, whispered, "She saved my life." The judge held up a hand for silence. Children rarely speak in such hearings. But these words carry weight. Alexander's face burned with fury. He slammed a fist against the table. "They're children. They don't understand." The judge's gaze hardened. "On the contrary, they understand perfectly." The judge reviewed the will, the hospital records, the testimonies. The room held its breath. "Finally, this court rules that while custody remains with the parents, oversight shall be shared with the maternal grandmother, as stipulated in Richard Rothwell's will. Furthermore, the nanny, Isabella, is recognized as a legal guardian figure in advisory capacity, given her proven dedication to the welfare of the children." The courtroom gasped. Alexander shot to his feet. "This is outrageous." The gavel struck again. "It is the law. You may appeal, but today the children's welfare takes precedence." For the first time in his life, Alexander Rothwell had lost. The boys laughed freely. They studied with focus. They played in the garden without fear. And always Isabella was there not just as a nanny, but as something more. At dinner, when Alexander barked too sharply, the boys lifted their heads and said, "We have a say too." And he for once backed down. When Victoria passed through briefly, phone buzzing, Ethan said, "If you can't stay, don't promise you will." And for the first time, Victoria had no reply. The boys had found their voices, and Isabella had taught them to use them. One evening, Alexander found Isabella in the garden, watching the triplets chase fireflies. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "You've made me look weak." "No," Isabella said softly. "I've made you look human." He scoffed. "Do you think the world respects me now?" "Respect without love is fear," she replied. "And fear dies the moment someone stands up to it." He stared at her, jaw clenched. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged. "I don't know how to be what they need," he admitted. "Then learn," she said. "Start by being present." It was the first honest conversation they had shared. When the boys' maternal grandmother arrived, frail but sharp-eyed, she embraced them fiercely. "My darlings," she whispered, "I thought I'd never be allowed to see you again." Isabella watched as the boys clung to her. For all her weakness, the grandmother radiated something Alexander never had: unconditional love. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, grandmother and nanny, protecting the children from the storm of wealth and neglect. And slowly, even Alexander began to realize that he was no longer the master of a mansion. He was only one voice among many. One quiet night, Isabella sat alone by the window. The house was silent, the boys asleep, the storm passed. She thought of the humiliation she had endured. The cruel laughter, the whispered insults, the moments she nearly broke. And she thought of the promise she had kept, "I don't leave." For the first time, she allowed herself a smile. She had come into this house as the 13th nanny, expected to fail. Instead, she had become its light. The letter on Alexander's desk was stamped with the crest of the appellate court, its edges sharp, its ink a dark certainty. He held it as one might hold a blade, with fear disguised as fury. "They want to rehear it," he muttered to no one, and to everyone. "They think they can judge my house twice." Mrs. Aldridge, hovering by the doorway, dared a breath. "Perhaps, sir, they wish only to confirm what is best for the boys." "What is best," he snapped, "is that I decide." But even as he said it, some small, truer voice inside him shivered. He had decided so many things: the restaurants that closed by his signature, the buildings that rose where there had been old brick and sky, the people who bent when he leaned. And yet 3 small boys as boys would not bend without breaking, and for the first time in his life, he had to wonder whether bending had been the point after all. He folded the letter once, twice, 3 times, as though he might crush the verdict inside it, and then slid it beneath the paperweight his father had left him, the weight he had never questioned, until a plain nanny arrived and refused to flee. The appeal was set for Friday. The days between the summons and Friday unfolded with a strange clarity, like sunlight after rain. Isabella, newly recognized in advisory capacity by the court, did not change her routine. The boys still had cinnamon on toast, still raced the dog down the hall, still took their reading practice under the window with the softest morning light. But other things shifted. "Today shall teach me courage." "How?" Ethan asked, genuinely puzzled. "By doing what I ask even if you don't want to, by noticing something you have never seen before even if it's been in front of you all along, and by telling a truth you're afraid to say." They considered this solemnly, as if it were a quest. "And what will you teach us?" Lucas asked. Isabella smiled. "How to love without leaving." They did not answer with words. 3 small hands slid onto her forearm, at once a knot of trust. Later that morning, Alexander lingered outside the nursery with the clumsy stealth of a man unpracticed in listening. He heard Isabella transform fractions into slices of fruit, discipline into a game of red and green marbles, reading into theater. He heard Henry's impatience soften when Isabella let him set the timer. He heard Ethan gasp at the way dust motes float like galaxies if you stand just so in the sun. He heard Lucas, voice trembling, tell the tiniest truth: "Sometimes I pretend I'm sick so she won't leave the room." Isabella's answer was not scolding. "That must be heavy in your chest," she said gently. "Thank you for trusting me with the weight." There was a silence, and then Lucas whispered, "It's lighter now." Alexander put his head against the doorframe and closed his eyes. The doorway smelled like lemon oil and old oak and some bright humbling thing he could not name. That afternoon, Isabella found Victoria in the study, packing for yet another quick trip. A silk scarf lay across the suitcase like a flag that could never be captured. "Mrs. Rothwell," Isabella said softly. Victoria did not look up. "If you're here to convince me to stay, don't. I am needed." "You are needed here, too," Isabella said, not with accusation but with a weariness that sounded like truth. "Not as a perfect mother, as a present one." Victoria's fingers faltered on the zipper. "Do you have any idea what it costs to be a woman who is not allowed to fail? If I stop moving, the world tips me off." "It will not tip your sons," Isabella replied. "They are not an audience. They are a home." Silence drew a boundary between them. Then Victoria's shoulders shook once barely. "I don't know how to come back without admitting I left." "By walking through the door," Isabella said. "Not because the court demands it. Because they don't know how to stop waiting unless someone arrives." Victoria stared at the suitcase and then, slowly, closed it again. She did not promise anything. She only sat down, and in that small surrender there was the first shape of an apology. That evening, another apology appeared, different but equally strange. Alexander in the nursery door, contrite in a way that made him look younger and, somehow, braver. "I was wrong," he said, the words stiff in his mouth, as if he had never used them in this order. "About many things. The gala. The way I spoke. The drawer." Isabella's face softened. "Thank you." "It doesn't fix it," he said. "No," she agreed. "It begins it." He nodded, awkward and human. If we lose on Friday, I will not make a scene." "You may lose something," Isabella said gently, "and still save everything that matters." He didn't understand, not yet, but he understood that he wanted to. On Thursday night, the boys begged for fireflies. The garden answered with a soft constellation, blinking yes in the hedges. "Make a wish," Isabella said. "I wish you'll never leave," Henry blurted. Ethan held his firefly close to his eye, then opened his hands with terrible tenderness. "I wish Mama will come watch us fall asleep, just them." "Go to them," Isabella murmured. Together and awkwardly they did. Victoria crouched first, knees bending with a small wince, and let Ethan place a firefly in her open palm. Alexander stood a second longer than a second too long, then finally lowered himself to sit on the grass, beside Henry and Lucas. And in that tableau, boys lit by small lanterns, a mother who didn't leave for a moment, a father whose shoes grew, wet with dew, something more binding than law, threaded the family together. Not forever, just enough to face tomorrow. Friday morning, the family walked the long hallway to the door. On the walls, the Rothwell men stared down from oil paintings, stern jaws, brows like commandments. At the end of the hall hung Richard Rothwell, the grandfather, eyes steel blue, mouth set to live forever in disapproval. The boys squeezed Isabella's hands. "He looks mean," Henry whispered. "He looks heavy," Isabella said, "like a man who believed he must carry everything alone." Alexander stopped, surprised by how true this sounded. He looked at his father's portrait and felt the ache he never had time to feel. "He taught me that softness is failure," he said quietly. "And yet," Isabella replied, "it was a nurse with soft hands who kept Lucas breathing." He could not argue with breath. They moved on. The appellate court was cleaner than the last, its wood lighter, its echo precise. A new panel of judges took their seats. The courtroom packed once more. The story had grown legs and kept walking. Opening statements recited what everyone already knew. Then came what no one had planned. The grandmother asked to speak. Frail, yes, but her voice had the iron that time tempers, not the brittle that pride invents. "I do not want to take them," she said simply. "I want them to be taken care of. By their parents, if possible. By a woman who stayed when others ran, if necessary. The name on the gate does not feed a child's heart. Presence does." A hush fell. A cameraman sniffled as if he'd been ambushed by his own childhood. The court invited a child advocate to testify next. She had observed the household for 2 weeks since the first ruling. "The children are thriving under the nanny's consistent care and the grandmother's oversight," she reported. "They showed decreased anxiety, increased engagement, and healthier sleep. The father has attended 3 shared reading sessions. The mother has remained in the home overnight 2 evenings this week." A pause. Progress, though imperfect, is visible. Alexander stared at his shoes and then, bravely, lifted his gaze and did not look away. Then, unexpectedly, the judge called for statements from the children, not because the law required it, but because their previous words had borne such clarity. Henry spoke first, voice steady. "When Papa yells, my stomach hurts. When Mama leaves, my chest hurts. When Isabella stays, it stops." Ethan's eyes, bright as the fireflies, turned toward the bench. "I need someone to look when I hold up my picture. She looks." Lucas took a breath too big for his lungs and pushed words through it anyway. "I'm not scared to sleep if her door is open." The court does not often cry, but it does sometimes listen. Alexander's lawyer rose stiffly. Your Honors, emotion must not overtake law. Perhaps, the presiding judge said, we should let law catch up to what it's for. Rulings in appellate courts arrive like thunder after you've already smelled the rain. The panel retired. The room hummed. Alexander surprised everyone by asking the usher for a glass of water for Isabella. He did not know how to hand it to her except with both hands, as though returning something as if she had drawn a door on a wall and suggested he try the handle. The judges returned. The presiding judge's voice was clear. We affirm the lower court's order with one modification. Alexander closed his eyes. Victoria held her breath. Isabella held 3 small hands that were trying very hard not to shake. We affirm shared oversight with the maternal grandmother and the nanny's advisory role. We further order a structured reunification plan requiring the father to engage in weekly presence commitments and parenting coaching, and the mother to meet minimum in-home time thresholds. Compliance will be reviewed quarterly. Failure triggers expansion of the grandmother's authority. There was no winner to applaud, and perhaps that was the victory. The gavel fell. The case for now was done. The press wanted a quote. None came. The family escaped through an underground garage like thieves fleeing a jewel, though what they were carrying now was responsibility, which is worth more and weighs heavier. Back home, the boys suggested a picnic on the nursery floor. Isabella spread a blanket. Mrs. Aldridge brought grapes and little sandwiches cut into crooked crowns. The grandmother blessed them with a trembling sign of the cross, and then fell asleep in the armchair, satisfied in a way the mansion did not breathe warmth. It exhaled marble, glass, and silence, the kind of silence that came from money so vast it could drown out laughter. 12 nannies had walked through its gates in the past 30 days. 12 women, all polished and smiling, ready to prove their training could tame chaos. 12 were left in tears, their suitcases trailing behind them like surrender flags. Alexander Rothwell, the millionaire master of the house, found it amusing. Over dinner, between calls with investors, he would remark casually, "How many days this time? 3? 5? Place your bets." His guests laughed. His children, 3 boys, identical at first glance, but each with a streak of mischief, laughed too, though for a different reason. Henry, Ethan, and Lucas were 7 years old, clever enough to know how to weaponize boredom, wealthy enough to believe rules didn't apply to them, and lonely enough to disguise pain behind rebellion. They did not have their mother to soften their edges. Victoria Rothwell, a brilliant lawyer for the glittering world of celebrities, lived inside airports and courtrooms more than inside her own home. Even when she was physically present, her mind lived in depositions, client scandals, and strategy calls. She had mastered the art of smiling at her sons while her phone buzzed endlessly in her palm. And Alexander, their father, was no better. His calendar was a fortress. He gave the boys 5 minutes at breakfast, perhaps 10 at night, if they were lucky. When asked why, he would shrug, "They'll thank me when they inherit." So the children learned early that they could burn through nannies like matches, and nobody in that house would stop them. When Isabella arrived, nobody expected her to last a day. She did not wear the polished black of the previous nannies, nor the stiff collar that looked like it belonged in a museum. She carried no illusion of grandeur, no glossy resume padded with recommendations. Just one bag, a simple dress, and eyes that did not dart nervously the way others had. Mrs. Aldridge, the housekeeper, shook her head. Poor thing. The boys will shred her spirit by tomorrow. 13th in 30 days. Alexander's first glance at her was not kind. He leaned on the grand staircase, tie loosened after a late meeting, voice dripping with sarcasm. Another applicant to the Rothwell experiment, he said. Miss Isabella. Isabella. He rolled the name as though tasting something bland. Well, Isabella, the odds are against you. My sons made professionals quit in record time. So tell me, what makes you think you'll be different? She didn't flinch. I didn't come here to prove I'm different, she said softly. I came because children don't need perfection. They need someone who doesn't leave. Alexander smirked, but the smirk did not reach his eyes. The triplets were already preparing their battlefield. They tied ropes across corridors, filled water balloons, scattered marbles, and waited behind doors for the first screams. Every other nanny had cried out, by now slipping, shouting, threatening, begging. But Isabella stepped on the marbles, steadied herself, and laughed. Not the nervous laugh of fear. A warm laugh that filled the corridor, like sunlight spilling through stained glass. She bent down, gathered a handful of marbles, and said, "If you want me to fall, you'll have to try harder." Or, she knelt so the boys could hear her whisper, "You can teach me the game, and we'll see who wins." The triplets froze. They hadn't expected a challenge. And before we go further, if stories like this stir something in you, if you believe hidden truths and fragile families deserve to be told, subscribe now. More stories are coming, each more tangled than the last. And I want to hear from you. What do you think Isabella should uncover next in this mansion? A hidden letter? A forbidden love? A secret child no one knows about? Leave your idea below. Your comment might inspire thee. Don't care. If he hates you, then we'll hate him back. Isabella shook her head firmly. No. Don't let his anger teach you anger. Let it teach you compassion. They frowned. Compassion for him? No, she said gently. Compassion for anyone who feels as small as you did tonight. That's how you win. For the first time, the boys didn't argue. They crawled into bed beside her, whispering, "Don't leave us." She brushed their hair back and whispered, "I won't. Not even if the whole world laughs." A week later, Alexander sent Isabella on an errand into town with the boys, deliberately without a driver, forcing her to walk with them through crowded streets. It wasn't the walk that was cruel, but the whispers. The Rothwells were known everywhere. Shopkeepers stared, curious why the millionaire's sons were walking with a plain nanny. Some even smirked, muttering, "That must be the one he hasn't fired yet." One woman sneered loudly enough for the boys to hear, "Poor thing, doesn't she know she's disposable?" The boys stiffened. Henry grabbed Isabella's hand fiercely. "You're not disposable." Ethan glared at the woman. "She's better than all of you." Lucas shouted, "She's our nanny, and she's not leaving." People turned, startled. Isabella felt her cheeks burn, but also swell with pride. The boys had defended her publicly, boldly, without fear. For the first time since arriving, she felt the scales tip. Maybe Alexander's cruelty couldn't erase what was growing here, loyalty. When they returned, Victoria was packing for another trip. The boys rushed to her, eager to tell her about their walk. But she barely glanced at them. Instead, her eyes swept over Isabella. "You're becoming far too comfortable here," she said icily. "Don't mistake their affection for permanence." "They need affection," Isabella replied. "They need discipline," Victoria snapped. "If you keep coddling them, they'll grow soft. And soft children do not survive in this family." The words chilled Isabella. She wanted to scream, to ask what kind of mother spoke that way. But she only bowed her head and said, "Better soft than broken." Victoria's eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth, then closed it, as though Isabella's quiet defiance was not worth wasting another breath. That night, Isabella found Henry awake, staring out the window. "Papa said Grandpa wanted us tough," he whispered. "Is that true?" She hesitated. "I don't know what your grandfather wanted, but I know what you need." "What?" "To feel safe. To be loved without condition." Henry turned, tears glistening. "Then you're the only one who gives us that." The words broke something inside her and healed something else. Later, as she tucked them all in, Ethan pressed a folded scrap of paper into her hand. "We found this," he whispered. It was part of a letter, torn and crumpled, clearly hidden in the garden soil. The ink was faded but legible. Should anything happen, guardianship must not fall into Alexander's hands alone. The children's well-being. Isabella's heart thundered. It was from the will. The boys had stumbled upon a fragment of the truth. The next day, Alexander discovered the boys had been in the garden with Isabella. He stormed into the nursery, face red with rage. "You're filling their heads with nonsense," he roared. "Do you think you'll turn them against me?" "They don't need me to do that," Isabella said calmly. "You're doing it yourself." His hand twitched as if he might strike the desk, but he stopped. His voice dropped to a growl. "You have no idea what you're playing with. That will is not a fairy tale. It is a weapon." She met his gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone pointed it at the truth." His eyes blazed, but before he could reply, Henry stepped forward. "Don't yell at her." The other boys followed, standing beside Isabella like soldiers at her side. For the first time, Alexander faltered. His sons had chosen their side openly with Victoria and Alexander. "I won't be here forever," Isabella said quietly. Panic flashed across both of their faces, and she lifted a hand. "Not because I'm leaving them. Because my job includes teaching you how to stay." Alexander swallowed. "How will we know when we're ready?" "You won't," she said, smiling. "You'll only realize you've been doing it." Victoria's voice trembled. "Do we get to ask for help when we forget?" "Of course," Isabella said. "You ask each other. You ask your mother. You ask me. Asking is a way of staying." The hallway light flickered once and steadied. Somewhere the dog snored. In the nursery, a page turned softly and lay down beside another page. Later, Isabella walked back to the hallway of stern faces. She stood before Richard Rothwell's portrait and said for herself, not for anyone to hear, "We are changing your house." She felt foolish and braver than foolishness. The face in the oil did not answer, but the corridor felt less like a test and more like a place you passed through on the way somewhere worth going. A step behind her. Alexander. "He would have called me weak," he said, standing shoulder to shoulder with her. Isabella tilted her head. "Then he would have been wrong." "He was wrong about many things," Alexander said, surprising himself by saying it. "But he taught me to finish what I start. I will finish this. With them." "With them," Isabella repeated. "That is the strength." He nodded. "And you?" "I will do what I promised," she said. "I will not leave." He exhaled, a sound that might have been relief. "Even when they no longer need you." "They will always need someone," Isabella said. "It doesn't have to be me. It has to be us." A month after the appeal, there was a small ceremony. No court required a kitchen table, for crayons, 2 signatures. The boys had drawn a family charter. Rule 1, we say sorry fast. Rule 2, we go slow at bedtime. Rule 3, we tell the truth even when it shakes. Rule 4, we do not leave without saying goodbye. Rule 5, we love in practice, not just in promise. Everyone signed. Henry in heavy capitals, Ethan in curly lowercase, Lucas, letters leaning on each other, Victoria, precise, Alexander, surprisingly careful, and Isabella, small, steady, enduring. They taped it to the fridge. The magnet was a firefly. Storms like trials return. On a night much like the one that had sent Lucas to the hospital, rain battered the windows and thunder rolled like furniture across the sky. Lucas flinched. Isabella was already at his door before he called. "I'm here," she said. "Will you sing?" he asked. She nodded, then stopped. "Will we sing?" she corrected, and glanced toward the doorway. Alexander stood there, uncertain. "I don't know the song," he confessed. "You don't have to," Isabella said. "You only have to stay." So he stayed. And when she began, soft and sure, he hummed the part he did not know until it belonged to him, and then to them. Victoria appeared later, hair damp from the window. She had opened to listen to the rain. She slid onto the floor beside the bed and rested her cheek on the blanket, And when the chorus came again, she found the notes like someone who has been away from a language and still remembers how to mean. The dog sighed. The thunder moved off. The house exhaled. A week later, a thin envelope arrived from the court. First compliance review satisfactory. The words were plain. The relief was not. They did not celebrate with champagne. They celebrated with a walk to the bakery that knows your name if you come back often enough. 3 cinnamon rolls, 2 coffees, 1 tea, 6 napkins, powdered sugar on proud upper lips. A family. The owner leaned across the counter. "On the house," she said, waving away the cash Victoria had instinctively pulled. "For the boys who always say please." The compliment rang louder in their hearts than headlines ever had. On the way home, Henry kicked a pebble straight down the middle of the walk for 10 glorious steps. "That's a record," Alexander declared, and no one knew whether he meant the pebble or his presence. In the forgiving light of early evening, Isabella and the grandmother sat in the garden where secrets had once been buried in a tin box. "You are leaving someday," the grandmother said not unkindly. "Yes," Isabella answered. "Someday. And the world will ask if you won," the grandmother continued. "They will measure in custody in courts and names on papers." Isabella smiled, eyes on the boys playing tag. "The world may. I will measure in unbroken bedtimes, in laughter that doesn't hurt, in a father who sits on the grass, in a mother who closes her eyes in her own house and rests." The grandmother patted her hand. "Then you have already won." Isabella returned to her room that night and found an envelope under her door. For a heartbeat, her body remembered the first message, "Don't trust the master. The children are not safe." A chill ran through her and was gone. She opened this one slowly. The handwriting was different, uncertain but deliberate. "Dear Isabella, thank you for not leaving. We wanted to tell you we're not scared when you breathe in the hallway. We will try to remember the rules we made. Please keep the firefly magnet. If you want to leave your door open sometimes, that's okay with us." From Henry Ethan Lucas. P.S. Sir Barkington also says thanks. There are awards large and heavy, and there are awards light enough to fit in a pocket and powerful enough to change the weather inside your chest. She folded the letter and placed it in her drawer the way other people place medals. In the end, no one built a statue. The news cycle moved on. The mansion did not become a fairy tale. It became something better, a place where people practiced being people. The boys had tantrums again and apologies again. Victoria missed a Wednesday and arrived on Thursday with a board game she promised to lose at least once. Alexander shouted on a Tuesday and stopped mid-sentence, took a breath, and asked to try again. Isabella burned the toast and laughed, and 3 voices shouted, "We like it burnt," because love has a way of changing taste. What transformed the house was not a single verdict or revelation, but the daily act of presence, stubborn, humble, show-up love. The kind that stays. The kind that rewrites legacies without erasing anyone's name. Respect, they learned, is not given to titles or bought with marble. It grows where someone kneels to tie a shoelace without hurry, where someone learns the lullaby they do not know, where someone says, "I was wrong," and then lives like they meant it. Dignity is not what you demand of others. It is what you practice toward them until they remember what it feels like to be seen. And love is not louder because it shouts. It is stronger because it remains. Months later, on a morning so ordinary it could have been missed, Isabella paused at the threshold of the nursery. The boys were arguing about the last blueberry, and then because they had learned dividing it into 3 not quite equal pieces and offering the biggest to the smallest, who pushed it to the middle, so they could decide again better. She watched a moment longer than a moment, then turned away. The hallway sloped toward the stairs. The stairs carried her toward the kitchen, where a grandmother hummed off-key, and a mother read a brief with her feet in slippers, and a father made a joke so bad it came back good. Isabella placed the kettle on the stove and waited for the small, faithful sound it would make when it was ready. Outside, beyond the hedges where fireflies rest, the world clattered and glittered and demanded. Inside, a door that had been a wall for years stood open. And when the kettle sang, it did not sound like victory. It sounded like home. If stories like this moved you, if you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever decided to stay when leaving was easier, subscribe now. There are more hidden rooms in the mansions of this world, more quiet revolutions at kitchen tables. And tell me below, what should the nanny discover next? A letter she wrote to herself years ago? A secret promise the grandmother made? A moment when the boys teach her something she didn't know she needed? Your idea might become the next story someone needs to hear. Because somewhere tonight, a child is listening for footsteps in a hall, and somewhere, a promise is being made not in marble, but in the soft, indestructible language of staying.